Hi everyone, my name is Ashton, and I decided to do my literature review over two aspects of infant development that I found super interesting, which were infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment. So, infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment, are they related? I think when I initially went into this, I was expecting to find a really concrete answer of infant temperament impacts infant caregiver attachment, or infant attachment determines infant temperament. I was expecting a black or white kind of conclusion. However, I really found that these two variables of infant development are actually pretty interchangeable, and affect each other in both ways. So, the first study that I found that discussed these two aspects of infant development actually looked at mothers and infant dyads from Jordan. And what they found was that easy infants, or even unpredictable infants, were associated with a greater maternal attachment. And then a study conducted in 2017 found that highly reactive or lower regulated infants were found to be more sensitive to parental emotional attachment demonstrations, both positively and negatively. And these attachment demonstrations were evaluated during bedtime rituals. And so, what they found between mothers and infants was that, temperament of the infant was impacted by the parenting quality or attachment security demonstrated at the point of bedtime. So, the more consistent the bedtime ritual and the more consistent the demonstration of emotional attachment or emotional availability from the parent dictated or was associated with the temperament of the infant and how they reacted to their parents. And then another study that was conducted this year found that secure attachment with the infant's mother was linked to greater compliance than those without a secure attachment to their mothers. So this study was really interesting because it looked at both maternal and paternal attachment to infant. And what they found was the mother secure attachment was more impactful for, or more associated with, greater compliance and lower effort for control versus infants with that were rated higher in defiance were more associated with paternal only secure attachments, which is just a really interesting finding. So the studies I just spoke of really spoke to how impactful infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment were on each other, kind of interchangeably. There wasn't one or the other. But what I also found in the research is how additional parental variables really played into how these two aspects of infant development interacted. So I wanted to talk about that for a second. So, kind of to start off, what I really found was how impactful stress was and how this impacted infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment. Stress from the parents, that is. Gutierrez and Ventura this year found that stress plays a big role. It can lead to an increase in technology use during time spent with the infant, which impacts infant attachment levels, which is associated with what they considered negative affectivity or infant temperament. Further research kind of led me to see this picture of a stress attachment infant temperament cycle, if you will. Um, infants, a study done in 2018 found that infants perceived as temperamentally difficult were associated with higher stress from parents while they were adapting to their new role. And stress associated with the adaptation of parents to a new role as a parent to an infant was also mentioned in Gutierrez and Ventura's study. Just that this was a really big catalyst for stress, and how parents were coping with that stress really impacted how they were interacting with their infant, technology use with infant, affect towards infant, and therefore was impacting the infant's temperament, and that was impacting that was really impacting the infant and caregiver attachment as well. And then a third study revealed a strong belief in discipline and the demonstration of external regulation from the parents may benefit infant temperament, or in this case, the infant's ability to securely attach and be easygoing as assessed by the observers. I also added in a little image to kind of depict that cycle that I mentioned earlier of the impact of parental stress on attachment, on infant temperament. And honestly, I probably could have put an arrow between infant temperament and attachment. Like the cycle could go the other way, which I just think is really funny. Wow, I really should have put the circle going the other way too. That would have been good. You live and you learn. Just how impactful all these variables on, and just how it keeps going. Because if stress is going to impact attachment, which impacts temperament, which impacts stress, it's just going to continue. So I just thought that was really interesting, and it helped me to have a visual. So I wanted to share that with you. So moving forward, I wanted to discuss what I found in the research as these aspects of infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment affect long-term development. And by long-term, I want to emphasize that I mean like the first 5 years, early childhood development. We're not talking like super long-term. The studies that I found really just discussed the first 5 years of life at the most. So let's get into that. So a bit of an older study found that higher levels of parent responsiveness during infancy were actually associated with lower child negativity and greater attachment security during infancy. And then later in development was correlated with a long-term association with social competence in those children as they entered kindergarten. And then another study discussed how early temperament and attachment was consistent with determining later toddler compliance and non-compliance. What they found was that compliance was highest in toddlers who were found to be lower in negative reactivity and more secure in their attachments during infancy. And this was also associated with optimal ability to, again, respond to the demands of later social environments as they entered either daycares or preschools or kindergartens, etc. So to kind of wrap up all the findings of this research and looking towards how we could apply this to practice, what could be helpful, what could help promote healthy infant development as it pertains to infant temperament and infant caregiver attachment and how that impacts later development. I really drew my conclusions to back when we discussed Gutierrez and Ventura's study and the other study that was emphasizing the impact of parental stress and the stress of becoming a new parent and kind of the cyclical nature of how those aspects impact one another. And it's hard to look at how this can be applied because stress happens. It's necessary to a point. That adaptation is going to require new forms of coping and adjustments. But I did want to look at how we could help. And so because stress just plays a big role in attachment, and higher levels of stress in parents were associated with what researchers consider temperamentally difficult infant behaviors and an increase in tech use, which was also linked to temperament. All of this being super impactful for infant and parent attachment. And then later ability to respond to social environment demands and self-regulate. This is really important to look at. And so what I really considered was, new parent resources. What can we encourage parents to look at? Pathways.org has a lot of resources, articles, advice, materials on how to prepare for a baby beforehand. So if we can preemptively work on coping and reducing stress, online resources are a great way to go, but also establishing mental health care, creating strong coping mechanisms before baby comes, in order to reduce stress in the moment while baby is there, promotes the ability to engage with baby. And then connecting with community support groups or emotional resources such as nearby family, friends, community support groups, maybe a local church if there's religious engagement in that family, just external resources, people to lean on. I think that goes a long way in reducing stress. And then some avenues for future research. There was maybe one or two studies that I found that looked at paternal influences, and while it was really emphasized in the findings of, oh no, it can't remember. Oh, I need to look back on that. But one of the studies really emphasized the importance of that maternal attachment and how that really impacted temperament and compliance in infants. I think that there's still a place to look at paternal influences because they're not there, right? It was still revealed in some research that looked at maternal influences that really did impact infant temperament, and infant caregiver relationship with the father played a role. And so I think that should be looked into more. And in most of the studies, I would say 80% of the studies I looked at were um, looking at families within the middle class, predominantly white. And so I think it would be really beneficial to analyze what this looks like for more diverse populations. Um, and then further, I would like to see some, just my curiosity in this was sparked, and I'd love to see like what this would look like in an experimental setting. How many or how would additional resources impact parental stress and therefore infant temperament and attachment. So a longitudinal study kind of playing with some variables, adding stuff in, removing things. How does that impact infant temperament and infant attachment and how those interact? So that's what I would suggest for future research. Here are my references. If you have any questions, please let me know, but I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Bye, y'all.